Yes. Hold on. Oh, hold on. I've got a couple people. There we go.
Well, I think we're waiting. Stephanie's going to set up.
Yep, here she is.
There she comes. Yeah. There's Sanjay.
Yes, I think we're ready whenever you are.
Okay. I think we're ready to go ahead.
Ready, Kurt?
Yes.
Steph, is it working better for you?
Yep, it is. Thank you.
Okay, good.
I've got a lot of distortion in the voices. I'm going to see if it's a little better. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Well, excuse me. Why don't would it be appropriate at this time to go ahead and let's just introduce everyone who's on tonight and then get started with the public comments? Okay, let's start with introducing the board members and a roll call. So we'll start with Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, board member.
Perfect, thank you. And then Jane.
And Gibson, board member.
Okay. Brooklyn. Brooklyn is on the correct, Diane? Oh, my internet.
Brooklyn did resign from the board.
It won't help.
And also Nathan Garza has resigned from the board.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you. Bill Graybill.
Bill Graybill, member here.
Very good. Stephanie.
Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair.
Okay. And then Diane.
Yes, I'm Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager and Staff Liaison to the board.
Okay, very good. And could our other guests introduce themselves as well?
Good evening. I'm Toni Wheeler, the City Attorney.
Hi, Tony.
Hello.
Troy Squire, Captain Lawrence Police Department.
Very good. All right. Thank you so much.
And Madam Chair, we also have a couple of staff people with the city here in the room. Sergeant David Ernst is here, and also Brandon McGuire, who is Assistant City Manager. And Brandon, we've done some reorganization in our office, and Brandon McGuire will be assuming the staff liaison responsibilities beginning with the next meeting. So he'll be talking with you here later this evening.
Okay. Brendan McGuire
Yes.
and Sergeant Ernst.
Madam Chair, Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager, would you like me to read through the meeting procedures for this evening as a reminder?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a few reminders to ensure that the COVID-19 provisions of the Kansas Open Meetings Act are met this evening. Board members and other meeting participants, as a reminder, you must state your name and title each time you speak. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on board members individually to provide their vote. Madam Chair, you will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. As we have introduced, various members of city staff are present on Zoom and here in the room, and they must also state their name and title each time that they speak. The chair will call for in-person public comment for those without access to technology options, and that would be in accordance with each of your agenda items, although I will note that there is no one here from the public currently. Staff present would direct those individuals to the podium to speak following social distancing and safety protocols. And I want to remind everyone to please mute yourself when you're not speaking. As you know, the agenda for this meeting provided certain instructions of how public comment would be handled. And in this case, there was no written public comment received by the deadline, so there's none that was posted with your agenda. And we also did not receive any requests to publicly comment via Zoom this evening. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you so much, Diane. Really appreciate it. Okay, we'd like to go ahead and look at the minutes from the last meeting. I hope you all had a chance to do that so we can vote on them. And let's start with the minutes from the January 23rd, 2020 meeting. Is there a motion?
Yep. This Stephanie Littleton, I place first motion to approve those.
Sanjay Mishra, second. Board member, second.
Okay, it's been a motion to accept the minutes by Stephanie Littleton and seconded by Sanjay Mirza. Did I say that correctly? Mirza or Mirza?
Mishra. SH.
Mishra. I'm transposing. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that. All those in favor, let's do a roll call. We'll start with Sanjay.
Aye. Sanjay Mishra, board member, aye.
Thank you. Jane? Jane?
And Gibson, board member, aye.
Bill?
Bill Graybill, board member, aye.
Stephanie?
Stephanie Littleton, vice chair, I approve.
Okay, and Tonia Salvini, I approve. So the motion is carried, and we've got a unanimous vote of 5. Okay, move on to the next minutes. Excuse me, and that would be for our last meeting, June 23rd, 2020. Do I hear a motion?
Stephanie Littleton, vice chair, I approve.
And a second.
Jane Gibson, board member, I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor signify with an aye. We'll start with Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, board member, aye.
And we'll go with Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member, aye.
We'll go with Bill
Bill Graybill, board member, aye.
and Stephanie.
Stephanie Littleton, vice chair, I approve as well.
Okay, the motion passed. It's unanimous. A vote of 5. Great. Okay, then we'll go to agenda item number 1. The draft of the Kansas Attorney General Racial and Bias-Based Policing Annual Report.
Madam Chair, Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Would you like a recap of this report, or would you like to ask questions, or how would you like?
I think let's start with a brief summary, and that would include the intent of it, and then open for questions.
Hello, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Sergeant David Ernst, just to give you a brief overview of this report here. It's the same one we had briefly discussed even last year. And so this report is required, I believe even statutorily required by the Kansas Attorney General's office. And actually how it's completed is you go online and you go to the reporting section and then fill in the information. And after submitting it, it will then generate an online, I think it's a PDF document or something similar that would look like this report. So I went in and created the report in a Word document to mirror what it will ultimately look like once I enter the report enter the information in the Attorney General's website. And so just to go over it, the reporting period for the Attorney General is July 1st of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. As you can see, we've had 0 bias-based policing complaints during that reporting period. And then we go through and answer the questions, yes, no, that the report requests us to answer. And so, yes, we've had, all of our officers have received bias-based policing training in the last reporting period. Yes, we do have a policy, and our policy essentially mirrors the AG model policy. Do we mandate specific discipline for sustained complaints of racial or bias-based policing? That would be yes as well. And even the Attorney General's office provides specific instruction. If you follow the model policy, which we do, then you would also mark yes to this because it is outlined in our policy as well. Do we have a community advisory board? And the answer would be yes, obviously, as we're standing here this evening. Do we have, the policing comprehensive plan? Maria Garcia and I briefly inquired about this last year, and so if my memory serves me correctly, this is some training that could be requested, and I don't know if it could be done by this board or the city commission, but ultimately come up with some sort of formalized comprehensive plan that's guided by the AG's office, and so I don't know much else that we do not have that. And then currently we are, due to the disproportionate minority contact study, so we are collecting racial and other bias-based policing data there, as that last question asks. Kind of don't know where to look, but does anybody have any questions?
Sure, let's open it up for questions. Jane?
I have a number of questions, Sergeant Ernst. First,
Sure.
Thank you for the report and for summarizing that for us. My first question is, I know that it's probably too much to ask you to talk about content, but could you at least tell us how much time is devoted to the bias-based training that you got?
The last training, and mind you, we have 40 hours. They have the officers have 40 hours of required training to keep their certification. And so this last reporting period, I believe it was 4 hours that the officers devoted to this training.
Does that mean that you have 10 trainings? Pardon me, does that mean you have 10 trainings?
No, ma'am, you could have one training that lasts 10 hours. It kind of depends. So this here is actually done online. This training was done online through the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. And actually, I don't know, it might even be possible for a civilian to also go and take that training, but I'm not 100% certain on that.
How would we find that out?
What's that? I'm sorry.
I beg your pardon. I wasn't even using my name. Jane Gibson. Could you tell us how we would find out about getting access to that training?
I can get the information back to you. And another way, if you go to the klatc.org, I believe, you can find the online training there, and you can see whether or not it will allow you to register and take the training. I just forget exactly what credential information you had to provide to take the training.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Tonia, Salvini. I have a couple of questions real quickly. Now, is the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center a separate entity? Or is that designated and directed by the Attorney General's office or the Department of Justice?
My honest answer is I don't know, but I believe them to be separate entities. So the Kansas, they do run independent of the Attorney General's office, but I would always be prepared for somebody to correct me on that, but I believe they're separate entities.
Okay, and then a second question I have, if you don't mind, and that is, this is a template that is, this report is a template out of the Attorney General's office, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Just to explain further, so I had to generate, if you go to the Kansas Attorney General's website, and you can find under reporting, and you can even go to our previous year's reports, you will notice that they will look similar to this in format. And what I'm trying to say is I've produced this document and filled in the blanks as if I had gone on to the Attorney General's website and completed it. But if I do that, then I will have submitted the report prior to presenting it to you, which is the ordinance requires. Is that clear? And I apologize if it's not.
Yes, very clear. Thank you. So my assumption then is that the questions that are on there are required then specifically from the Attorney General, and their expectation that every law enforcement entity has in the state of Kansas, correct?
If I understand your question correctly, are you saying that, if I understand your question correctly, the Attorney General's office is requiring us to have annual bias-based policing training? So yes, that would be a requirement. And then when it talks about the exemptions to the statute that's listed in that question, that has to do with an officer might be exempted because they're on military leave or some sort of prolonged medical leave, which not allow them to continue with their continuing education.
Okay, very good. And I don't know that we have seen that. Have we seen that policy on prohibiting racial and other bias-based policing?
You have seen, I presented I provided back at least when the board started, maybe another time after that. It is currently online with all of our other policies.
Of your others? Okay, perfect. Okay, any other questions?
Yes. Sorry, go ahead,
Okay,
Jane.
Stephanie? Huh?
Okay, Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair. Sergeant Ernst?
Yes.
I had a couple of questions. Good to see you, by the way.
Good to see you.
I know that you or somebody else maybe earlier on in our training handed out about the comprehensive plan. I wish I had it right in front of me because I did want to ask a question about maybe looking into that further, see what together we may want to do to put that into place. So I guess I would ask if we could look into that and find out more detail.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And just to kind of rehash my recollection, which admittedly could be wrong, was in completing this, I had reached out to Maria Garcia, and I believe she had contacted the AG's office. And it's, like I say, some sort of training that they would provide to dictate the parameters of the plan or whatever. And it would ultimately have to be, I don't want to say codified by the city commission, but something to that effect. So admittedly, I could be wrong, but I believe we could make that a future agenda item, and so, yes.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. The other question I have, and this is just kind of a big, broad question, just so I understand, who or maybe how is it decided if a complaint is racial or bias-based?
Typically is when somebody calls in and says, or a certain law enforcement action happened because of this protected class. An officer arrested me because of this protected class, or that's listed out in the ordinance, and so that is typically, if not almost all the time, how those complaints are made.
Okay, all right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Jane?
Thank you, Jane Gibson, board member. I just had a quick follow-up to Stephanie's question about the comp plan. Sergeant Ernst, is that the same thing as the strategic plan that I read in this RFP is for the first time underway?
So Brandon McGuire's here, the assistant city manager, and he's going to be speaking to that. But I think I can say with some fairly good confidence that those two things are unrelated. And so
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? If not, Sergeant Ernst, thank you so much.
Thank you all. It's good seeing you.
Good to see you too. Okay, do we need to vote to accept that report then on number 2?
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Madam Chair, yes, I think it would be great if you would make a motion to receive the annual report.
Sanjay Mishra, board member, make a motion to receive the report.
Okay, so motion by Sanjay to receive the report. Is there a second?
And Gibson, board member, I'll second.
Seconded by Jane Gibson. Okay, and let's go through a vote of aye. Let's start with Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, aye.
Jane.
And Gibson, aye.
Bill.
Bill Grable, board member, aye.
Stephanie.
Stephanie Littleton, vice chair, I approve.
Tonia Salvini, chair, I approve. And that's a vote, a motion and a vote to accept the report with the number 5 in agreement. Okay. Let's move on to number 3. And I did put, this is an update from me. I did, saw that on the agenda. I wrote Katie from the Human Relations Commission to see when she thought we might want to get together. I recommended maybe a time in September when the work group had done a little bit of work and we might think about going forward. So I hope that's agreeable. It says my internet's unstable. Is that agreeable with you all? Maybe to what is a little bit more on exactly what we wanted to look at and define a little better what we look, okay?
Tanya, you cut out, but I think you said September maybe?
Yes, I did, yes.
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay, I like your thumbs up there, Jane. Thank you. Okay, all right then. Is everyone good with that then? Moving ahead to number 4. Number 4 would be receive a recommendation from the working group regarding increasing the number of board members from 7, which is now 5, to 9. Stephanie, that was an agenda item proposed by you. Would you like to talk about that?
You bet. This is Stephanie Littleton, vice chair. You know, I think I've submitted it with the 2 main reasons. Number 1, primarily to support the purpose of our board. As we know, we have another number of things put before us that we need to address. So we do have quite a bit of work to do. So I'm just discussing our small working group as far as needing to possibly have 3 additional subcommittees. So that would definitely support if we had more membership. And the second is definitely to enhance the representation of our community. So that's my main reasons.
Okay. Any other elaboration? Okay, this is a recommendation then that was made. Do we want to receive this recommendation for the working group to incorporate into the, I'm guessing, the bylaws, correct?
Yeah.
Jane?
I think we wanted to have a discussion. Jane Gibson, sorry, board member. We wanted to have a discussion and hear from the other board members. This is it's kind of an important change, and maybe people have not had enough time to really think about that. And we, as a working group, have discussed it, and we're not all of one mind. We think it's something that needs to be thought carefully by the board and discussed by the board. So I'm hoping that we can hear from you and Sanjay, Tonia, because I think we 3 already kind of know what we think, or I don't actually. Maybe Bill and Stephanie are pretty clear. I'd like to hear some other views, and I'd like to hear a little more from Bill as well.
Sure, okay. Sanjay?
Trying to put anybody.
Bill? Huh? Bill?
Who did you recognize?
Bill. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I have some reservations about increasing the board size. One, it's been my experience that smaller boards work more efficiently than larger boards. And secondly, it's been my experience that larger boards encourage people to take their job less seriously because they got more people to depend on to do the work. One of the reasons it was discussed in the working group for having a larger board diversity. And I recall back when I first came into the first meeting, I looked around the room and I was sitting on a bias-based or a group that was supposed to be dealing with bias-based policing. I saw an Asian representation, a Native American representation, a Black representation, LGBTQ representation, and then three privileged white people, one of which was a retired captain from the Navy, a college professor, and a lawyer, none of whom I think probably ever experienced any bias or discrimination. If we're going to enlarge this board, I hope to God they do a better job of getting diversity on it than we did the first go round. Secondly, I'm a little concerned about how we're getting members. I'm not sure how you recruit members to the board. We got 2 openings, and my recommendation would be to get some publicity out to the public that these positions are open. I think there are people that would like to come in and fulfill them, but they don't know what they're even open. I suppose you could say, well, they should check the city website, but reality dictates to me that ain't happening. So, and then lastly, I think it's a little premature to be amending our bylaws in this way until we as a working group get done with our work. I see that we have another proposed report or study coming up which may involve this particular board, and I'd hate to see us make a lot of changes and then have to turn right around and change what we've done. So that's my reservations.
Okay.
Those are my reservations.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
I just want to repeat back to make sure I heard you correctly. The first would be the question to increase due to efficiency issues, and making sure that it's more efficient to have a smaller group, basically is what you said. And more diverse in that first one as well. The second one was to do some recruitment or more publicity in terms of filling those vacant positions. And then the third, in terms of amending the bylaws, I don't think we're ready at this point to amend the bylaws. I think it's to just, it's some of the work that I believe that came out of the work group just to have a conversation about that will go into the proposed bylaws once they're constructed. Am I correct on that, or am I off base there?
I think you fairly stated it, Tonia. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, other discussion? Sanjay.
So this is Sanjay Mishra, board member. Thank you. Thank you for recognizing me. I start with Bill's point about, yes, there was apparent diversity in the group, but I think to conclude that none of us have been racially discriminated is a leap, because those experiences were not shared. So we come from it from a different perspectives of our communities that in some ways we sort of represent. So we clearly bring experiences that have an impact on bias-based policing. Absolutely. Absolutely. The other point is, yes, a smaller size will make it more efficient. But what I heard board member or vice chair Stephanie introduce is we don't have enough warm bodies to man the subcommittees that we want to put together for the body to do a good enough job. So keeping that in mind, I would suggest I'm fine with increasing the number, and how we bring people on means that's we can make suggestions, but it's for other people to decide. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. I want to say that I appreciate all your points, for sure, especially, Bill, going back to yours in terms of the recruitment and the participation, basically by a greater pool of folks to think about in terms of either recruitment or publicizing to have folks get involved. I'm feeling like, and I'm thinking in terms of the direction that we might go is potentially expanding our role to serve the public better might warrant a larger group only to be needing to be done over the next few years, especially if we're getting to looking at a variety of different studies. I'm very interested in looking at this comprehensive and being involved in this comprehensive plan that Stephanie and Sergeant Ernst were alluding to that came out of that report. So I feel comfortable expanding it so we can have a few number of people really concentrating on some things that this board wants to do, and then bringing it back to the board and trusting each other's work to get that done, and spread that around too, so the load isn't just on 3 people or 2 people, that we can have some concurrent work going on with a number of people and report back to the greater board. So I support the larger number.
This is Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair. I just want to say I truly respect Bill's opinions and his feedback, because we've talked about that a little bit at length during a little working group. But and not that I need to kind of throw this back to everybody, but I do feel strongly with even the comments that everybody else has made so far that we really do need to get to the community. We need to get to the outreach. We really need to get through policies. We really need to look at training for both the PD and the board, the CPRB. So with that being said, oftentimes we're running with 5 or 6 folks and on the board, and it's just not sufficient. I totally understand the small group efficiencies mindset. I've worked enough in business to understand that piece of it too, but definitely we have a lot to do. Mm-hmm. I appreciate everybody's input, to put this out maybe at least to if be it now or the next meeting, put it before the city commission. I'm going to step out so Jane can comment. So thanks.
Okay, Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. There are a couple of things. One is I think that we all ought to think about those 4 categories of projects. That was, the working group came up with those 4 categories, and we haven't really discussed that either. But I mean, they make real good sense to me as the things where we should focus. But that is something maybe for everybody to read when we go through the ordinance and the bylaws and we understand what our mission is. That's where those come from. It's how we thought about parsing the responsibilities that we have been charged with by the city commission. So I think that bears some consideration. The other thing is, the view that we need 9 is really a view that we ought to work, maybe do a lot of things all at the same time. So if we had 9, we might imagine that we could work on 4 projects at once because we would divide the group up. An alternative model, and I'm not suggesting that one is better than the other, because I take Bill's points, but an alternative model is to have fewer people on the board and to take projects, instead of trying to get them all done at once, maybe taking them one at a time, which is just another way to work. I think we have a prior problem. You know, we're talking about getting 9, and we haven't even been able to keep 7. We have a problem of recruitment and retention. So I think we better be thinking about that. So Bill's point about, you know, how we're recruiting people and how people even know that these positions are open. I think those are really keys here. I don't know that we can get to 9 if we can't get to 7.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a good point. Thank you, Jane. Okay, any other comments?
Madam Chair, this is Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I just wanted to comment that if the board wished to support this, because the number of members are spelled out in the ordinance and the bylaws, those would need to be recommendations from the board to the City Commission to then act to increase the number of board members.
You cut out a little bit. I'm sorry. Would you mind repeating that?
No problem. Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. So I was just saying that if the board wished to increase the number of board members to 9, the appropriate thing would be for the board to pass a motion to recommend that change to the City Commission in the ordinance and the bylaws, since both of those are included in those documents which the City Commission would need to approve.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Is there a motion?
This is Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair. I'd like to make that first motion because I do think the time is going to take quite a bit to even get through the process to recruit and get folks on. So I'm making that first motion to approve.
Increase from 7 to 9 members of the board?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
This is Sanjay, Mishra. I will second that.
Sanjay seconded. Okay, all those in favor, aye. We'll start with Sanjay.
Sanjay, aye.
Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member, nay.
Okay, Bill Grable?
Bill Grable, board member, nay.
Stephanie Littleton?
Yes. Stephanie Littleton, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Tonia Salvini, I'm going to vote yay on that. So we've got 3 for yay and 2 for nay.
So, can I get in?
I'm sorry, I'm cutting out.
May I say something then, please?
Yes.
So given the split vote and not having 2 members on, not having 7, I'm a little, I feel on a little shaky ground now. I think 9 is a good number, but I want the board to come together.
Discussion? Jane?
I would just like to say, I think consensus is good too. And I might be willing to support 9. To me, it's just a little premature because we have a lot of work to do on the ordinance and the bylaws. So I'm not in principle opposed to any particular number or in favor of any particular number. I'm just thinking that we need a little more time. But that's really beside the point, because we do in fact have a quorum and the vote was 3-2. So, you know, we live with that. We just see what the City Commission says. And even then, you know, the working group will write it into our recommended revisions. because that was the vote, right? And we respect that vote, even if we don't always all agree with it.
Okay, other discussion? Okay, thank you, Jane, for those comments. We'll go with the vote right now, unless there is another motion. Okay, we'll go forward then. Yes, Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. Tonia, did we skip number 2? The 2019-2020 annual report to the City Commission of our board?
Like we did.
We accepted is it Diane?
Yes, Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. So you did take care of the first item, which was receiving the report from the police department on racial and other bias-based policing. But you do need to review and approve your annual report, item 2, per the ordinance.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry there. Okay, if you don't mind, we'll go ahead before we get to number 5. We'll go up to item number 2. Is everyone comfortable with that? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and go back to number 2 and review to approve the annual report. Diane, do you want to make any comments about that?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Again, this is just your annual report that you consider, and by ordinance, that you have to have this report completed and turned in to the City Commission by August 1st of each year. And Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, and I'm certainly open to any edits. Obviously, we tried to draft this and without yet completing the entire month here.
Jane?
I have a small edit on, it's the bullet point number under major activities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, number 7, the appointment of a 3-member working group to review the CPRB bylaws and ordinance and assemble a list of requested information and documents on here within 90 days to bring back to the board in response to the request for recommendations by the City Commission. I think that needs to say, it needs to include that we are charged with recommending revisions to the ordinance and bylaws. To me, that's not clear there. We had 2 charges. One was to review the CPRB bylaws and ordinance and recommend revisions to those. And the other was to assemble a list of requested information and documents. So there were 2 charges that I think need to be reflected there.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I guess I'm not understanding how that's not captured in the bullet. It does say assemble the working group to review the CPRB bylaws, the ordinance, and assemble the list of requested information and documents. Is there something I didn't catch? I'm sorry.
Jane?
Gibson, board member. I think maybe it's intended there, Diane, but what I read is review the CPRB bylaws ordinance and assemble the list of requested information and documents, but it doesn't say review and make recommendations for revision of. And that's maybe the most important thing that we agreed to do.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Thank you. That helps. I can certainly make that edit if it's supported by the board.
Yep, this
I move.
Vice Chair, I approve for that change.
Madam Chair,
By Bill and Bill?
I move that we make the amendments to the annual report as suggested by Jane.
Okay, is there a second?
Stephanie had moved, but Stephanie can second.
second?
Stephanie?
Yeah, I second that motion. Littleton.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a motion by Bill to accept the edits as presented by Board Member Gibson, second by Stephanie. All those in favor with an aye. We'll start with Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, aye.
Jane.
Jane Gibson, aye.
Bill.
Bill Grable, board member, aye.
Stephanie.
Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair, aye.
Tonia. Salvini, Chair. Aye. Okay, and the motion carried 5-0. All right, thank you. Any other comments or discussion regarding the report, Sanjay?
No, I was going to make a motion to accept the report. So that I can wait.
Okay, it's a motion by Sanjay to accept the report. A second? Jane?
Jane Gibson, second.
Okay, all those in favor with aye? And we'll start with Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, aye.
Jane?
Gibson, aye.
Bill?
Bill Grable, board member, aye.
Steph?
Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair, aye.
Tonia Salvini, Chair, aye. And the motion carried 5-0. Thank you all for pointing that out to me and going back and taking care of it. So I think we're ready for number 5, the city staff discussion of upcoming Lawrence Police Department consultant study, request for proposals, scope of work. So let's start with any questions, and do we want to pose these to you, Diane, or any kind of other comments or questions that we might have?
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I would recommend, if the chair and the board would agree, Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager, is here, and he's prepared to walk through this with you. We wanted you to be aware of this request for proposals that's coming out and getting some feedback from you all. So he's prepared to do that if you'd like this evening and be able to answer any questions that you may have.
I believe we would welcome that. Absolutely. Is everyone in agreement with that?
Good evening. Actually, I guess I'm speaking into this one. Sorry. I apologize, but I've been taking every meeting for the last 4 months straight from my computer at my desk. So this is a new setup for me. I'm going to attempt to share the screen. There we are. Okay. So I appreciate the opportunity. This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. I appreciate the opportunity to share this request for proposals with the board this evening. This is something that the city manager has prepared in consultation with staff and city commissioners, and we hope the Community Police Review Board members. This is a study, a consultant study, a request for proposals for a consultant study that would help us with a comprehensive evaluation of our police department. It's something that we've been wanting to begin for some time now, but it has been obviously held up with some of the recent events with the pandemic, and we are at a point now where we're able to advertise this, and we think we can get going with the solicitation for proposals from consultants and begin the work. And so we do contemplate a national solicitation, so we will be requesting proposals from consultants across the country who are very skilled in reviewing, studying, advising on best practices, cutting edge practices in policing and all aspects of policing. And so I wanted with the board this evening to walk through the scope of work, and that's really outlined in the study objectives and anticipated scope of work section. So I will blow this up just a little bit. And again, this RFP, which is still in draft form, is posted to the agenda. So if you have trouble viewing it this evening, or if you'd like to review it more after this presentation, then please feel free to access it on the agenda. And so I will walk through pretty quickly each of these bullet points to give you an idea of the scope of work that we contemplate. I will say that this will be somewhat of a dynamic scope, in that we will be interviewing consultants who are, we hope, very experienced in performing this type of study. And so a lot of times with a professional services agreement, such as what we would get into with this type of work, the scope gets refined as you interview the consultants, and especially as you interview the selected consultant, to come up with that final scope of work before you enter an agreement. And so I would really appreciate any comments and any feedback from the board members this evening of opportunities that you think we may not be capturing within the scope of work, or revisions that you might suggest making to that. And we can do that in tonight's meeting. And I also want to provide the opportunity to contact Diane and myself through email or by phone. And we'd hope that you would do that individually. You can email us with additional comments that you have following our discussion tonight. But we do want to begin advertising the RFP very soon, within the next couple of days, if not even yet by the end of business tomorrow. So, so the first point is to evaluate employee engagement levels and provide recommendations to strengthen the work environment, the organizational culture, and fulfillment. This acknowledges that we do have work to do in our employee culture and our employee engagement, and we need to make sure that we have an environment that we're providing for our police department and all of the staff in our police department that is an enriching environment where they can do the best work that they're capable of doing. We've got a great department, great staff, and we want to build on that, do that in a way that is very responsive to our community's goals, but also in a way that makes sense to the staff of the department, in a way that they can come to work and they can do a good job using their skills and their talents to better the community, and by doing so feel a great sense of fulfillment in their work.
Excuse me, Brandon?
Yes.
I should have asked this. This is Sanjay Mishra. I should have asked this earlier. When would you like to take questions? When you get done, or as you are doing?
How about I walk through each of these bullets, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The second task would be to evaluate and provide recommendations about the department's responsiveness to and ability to equitably serve all community members. So here, this is where we're looking externally, making sure that we close that gap between expectations from the community and how we actually go about delivering the public safety services provided by the department. The next task would be to evaluate the department against modern policing practices, and here we're looking at industry best practices and practices that really would be innovative that we can apply here in Lawrence. The third task would be to lay the groundwork and establish a process for the department to achieve accreditation through CALEA, which is the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. And this has been a goal of the department. They've already undertaken this effort, but we hope that the consultant will help us really kickstart that effort and help us come up with a good plan to accomplish that in as timely of a manner as possible. The next task would be to evaluate and make recommendations on department staffing levels. We have done some work within the department, focused primarily on the patrol division, but we do know that we are down many FTEs, meaning full-time equivalent positions, and we want to make sure that we provide the department with a staffing level that allows them to be successful and meet the objectives of the community. The next task would be to evaluate and make recommendations on the department's command and leadership structure and their capabilities. And this is pretty self-explanatory. It's just really looking at what the ideal org chart and leadership structure and capacities of those leaders would be. The next task is to evaluate and make recommendations for equitable policing and procedural justice practices and systems. This would become, I think, more technical and complex, but again, trying to be responsive to community expectations. The next task is to develop a position profile for the chief of police position. And so we still have a vacancy in the chief of police position. We have not started recruitment. Captain Brixius has been named as the interim chief, and we look forward to his service and think that he will be in that role for some time while we work through this process in order to develop a job description and a position recruitment process that will help us really be responsive to the community's goals, many of which are being worked on by the Community Police Review Board and will be subject to this consultant work. The next task is acknowledges the national discourse, the calls for reform in policing and improvements in community responsiveness. And so we would like the consultants to evaluate and provide recommendations for best practices to make sure that we're doing excellent work in engaging our community and again, closing that gap between community expectations and service delivery. The next task is to recommend alternatives to police response for current and traditional police calls for service. And so here is, this is where we really look at those alternatives to service delivery, such as is our current approach to providing services and responding to calls related to mental health crisis. Is that the best approach, or are there alternatives, alternative models that we can evaluate and implement here? And that's just one example. The next task would be to evaluate and provide recommendations on hiring, training, professional development, et cetera, to become, to accomplish our goals to be a high-achieving organization. And so this is really, again, just looking at making sure we recruit, we retain, and we constantly train and constantly improve so we have a highly skilled, highly talented workforce, and we really build on all the strengths. The next task is to evaluate and make recommendations regarding statistical and data reporting systems and public reporting protocol. And so here we're really looking at all of our data. Law enforcement collects and maintains a lot of data, a lot of which Sergeant Ernst discussed this evening. And we want to make sure that we make the best use of that data, that we're transparent in our data. We're a data-driven organization in terms of our decision-making, our policy-making, and our service delivery model. The next task is is related to Douglas County emergency communications, as well as the booking and holding facilities. And so here we're looking at those interactions between those different agencies, our agency, the 911 system, the jail, and make sure that we are optimizing those relationships. And then the last task that we contemplate in this draft scope of work is to help the department make advancements and complete its strategic plan. And so this is where we really want to make sure that we are engaging stakeholders, engaging department leadership and staff, as well as probably other city officials and staff, and coming up with that final strategic plan document that really becomes the roadmap for the future development and evolution of the department. Many of our departments do conduct their own strategic planning processes, and that is a key sort of management tool to help us close, again, those expectations between community expectations and policies and how we actually get the work done, how we create the department that reflects and is responsive to those expectations. So that is the scope of work as we have contemplated it. And then I did want to point out that the RFP does mention a number of different stakeholder groups, including the Community Police Review Board, that we expect to engage in this consultant work. We do think we want this to be a very engaging process. We do a lot of studies similar to this with other parts of our city operations, and it is very important that we come out of this effort with a work product that really does reflect a robust and a genuine public and stakeholder engagement process. So if anybody, as you're reading through this, has any ideas of other stakeholder groups that we might not be missing, or that we might be missing, then please do feel free to offer those suggestions. So that's the end of my comments, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. McGuire.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes. Sanjay?
Yeah, so this is Sanjay. Thank you, Mr. McGuire, for doing this. So these are less questions, more comments. So as I look at bullet 1 and 2, right? Oops. Can we keep the? Okay.
I'm sorry, would you like me to bring the screen share back up?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Then we can. Yes. People don't need to see me. They need to see that. So when I look at that, it says engagement rules commission, strengthen the art culture, employee fulfillment. So it seems that we have an understanding that we are failing. We are starting from that kind of a assumption. Evaluate and provide regarding department's responsiveness. What's the data that the consultant will have to fulfill the second bullet, first bullet? I also wanted to ask the question that further down when you say high-performing org culture. So I hope the consultant would come and explain to us what that means and what some metrics would be for that.
Yes.
Because at this point, I see nothing in it. And same thing is for equitable policing. We have no data. We want to just tell them, look, we want to do equitable policing. We have no information. So hopefully as this project gets done or the consultant finishes their work, they will tell us, here are some parameters to follow for equitable policing. Here's what a high-performing org culture looks like. And these are some of your metrics that you should follow. So that's, if you keep in your notes, they may not go into the RFP, but when you interview some people, I would be asking those questions. Thank you.
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Excellent point, and well taken. Something that we certainly look forward to as well. And we think that there are tremendous opportunities. In fact, Sergeant Ernst and I have been in discussions about some of those as well, to be able to make better use of our data and our visualization of data and presentation. So we're excited to get into that work.
Jane, go ahead. Jane Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. Thank you, Mr. McGuire. I appreciate the presentation and the RFP. It's ambitious, and I share Sanjay's interest in seeing what sorts of metrics can be produced to help us measure and evaluate our successes in all of these goals here. But that's really sort of to the heart of my question. It wasn't that long ago that the police department, I believe the police chief, commissioned the Allegro study, which was essentially, the methodology was flawed. And I guess my question is, whom do you have in your group who will assess the merits of the proposal to be sure that the methodology is valid? Do you have a statistician? Do you have somebody who understands qualitative research and quantitative research who can assure that when you accept the proposal, that what you get on the other end is going to be something that you can use? Thank you.
Yes. Okay. This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. And sorry for the awkward pauses. It's hard not to be able to read the facial cues. So we do provide some criteria that we're looking for in the consultant's proposals. And I will be the first to admit the city does not employ statistician positions, such as I know, like the universities have some fantastic statisticians working in their enterprise data. We don't have that robust of a workforce, but we are, we make use of a tremendous amount of data in a very diverse range of operations. And we do have some extremely sharp people working in big data environments within our organization. And we anticipate being able to engage some of those skill sets. And if we do feel like we are deficient in our ability to really vet that with the consultants who do submit, then we're certainly happy to draw on community resources to help assist in that evaluation.
Okay, other questions, comments?
Just a follow-up, Madam Chair.
Yes, Jane?
I just wanted to say my facial cues are friendly, and I thank you for the answer. I do hope that you will take advantage of community resources at the university. There is money available to hire people who have tremendous expertise in these areas from the university. And money will be spent, a lot of money will be spent if this study comes to fruition and produces the kind of data that you're looking for. Some of that money could get you data that will be valid, get you some findings that will be useful. So I hope that you will look into local resources who can help with this project. There's no reason why we can't use the expertise we have right here in town. Thank you.
Okay, Bill? Bill, did you want to comment?
Mr. McGuire, how much is budgeted for this project? This is Bill Graybill, board member.
Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. I am hesitant to divulge the amount that we are contemplating for the contract. I don't want to jeopardize our leverage in negotiation and procurement. But this is it is funded within the resources that we have in our adopted budget this year. We have not named a specific price in the RFP.
What she said.
Sorry, Bill, then Jane?
Who did you recognize?
Bill? You?
Oh, as a follow-up to that question, Mr. McGuire, do you know how much they spent on the last study?
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Off the top of my head, I do not, but we would probably be able to find that information and get it back to the board if you wish.
Okay, thank you.
I could send the board a one-directional email with that information.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Bill. Jane?
Diane might remember how much was spent on that Allegro study. As I recall, it was about $10,000, which is a very inexpensive study. So I hope the budget's bigger to get a better quality result this time, but I guess we'll find that out when the bids come in. I have another question for you, and it may be off topic a bit. I had asked earlier about whether the strategic plan and the comp plan were the same thing, and we heard that they are distinctive things and that you might be able to clarify the difference between those two things, because this RFP makes reference to a strategic planning initiative. Can you tell us what the difference between those two processes are? And then I have a follow-up.
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Yes, thanks for the question. The comprehensive plan that Sergeant Ernst referred to in his report to the Attorney General's office is actually a bias-based policing comprehensive plan. What the RFP refers to is a department strategic plan. So that's really looking at the entire operation of the department. So you're looking at all functions in the department, how they work together, how they fit within the city organization, within the policy structure and governance of the city organization. And it's much more of an operational plan to accomplish the goals for the department. I hope that makes sense. But maybe a reference would be looking more at, for comparison, maybe our Park and Recreation Department strategic plan, although I believe they actually title that comprehensive plan. But they have a plan like that posted on their website, and that shows an example of what a department-specific strategic plan would look like.
Thank you. Jane Gibson, board member. Yeah, I'm involved in another strategic planning process.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with what that can look like, and I also know they're not all alike. Thank you for the clarification of those two processes.
Certainly.
You mentioned in the RFP and in I guess summarizing these bullet points for us a number of times about the community expectations, and you've implicated the CPRB, saying that we are somehow going to play a role here. Do you have any expectation of having community members on the strategic planning committee so that you know what community expectations are? Or the CPRB, might that be represented on your strategic planning group? Considering the charge for this board includes things like outreach and education, I wonder if there isn't a place for us, or is that something anybody has contemplated?
Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. I think that's something that we certainly should be contemplating. I have not been involved in discussions about that yet, and I know that there has been some work internally done on the strategic plan. So to be completely honest with you, I need to get briefed and up to speed on the work that has been done, and then we'll ask the consultant to take a look at that and give us a good roadmap to completion for that strategic plan. But it is good practice in a strategic planning process to engage stakeholders. The Community Police Review Board has not served as an advisory board to the police department. It's served as a more of a process board, and so I'm not sure if including the Community Police Review Board as a member or members of the board on the steering committee was contemplated originally, but it's something as this board planning process goes on and this consultant study goes on, I think certainly we should be discussing.
Thank you, Jane Gibson. The ordinance that created this board and the bylaws specify that we do provide an advisory function to the police department and to the city commission. So, I mean, there may be some logic, including the CPRB as well as community members. This is one of the problems in a lot of these kinds of strategic plans is they make references to groups that they really haven't talked to, like the community. And I think that I hope that you will all discuss who needs to be included in your strategic planning process, and including the CPRB. And now, having said that, because that's, yet another responsibility, I'm wondering if we shouldn't talk about increasing the size of the board to about 12.
Is there a motion, Jane?
No.
Okay.
No, I would like to ask for some feedback, though, I don't want this question to just, fall away. I think we need to have a response to the question, whether or not the CPRB and the community members, because that is a part of our charge, will be included in the strategic planning process.
Okay. This is Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair. I am completely in agreement with you, Jane, that we should be. So
Absolutely. This is Tonia, if I could. Is there a proposal that goes along with this in terms of the timeline and the type of process? Are there going to be listening sessions out in the community? I mean, what's the strategy in terms of soliciting that kind of input that we're talking about, besides accessing a board like ours or the Human Relations Commission, doing that outreach to the community to listen to community members to get feedback during that process?
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. That is something that we are asking consultants who are interested in this work to provide us. And then, and typically how this sort of consultant selection process goes, we provide the general scope of work as we envision it, and they give us their proposal. We qualify them, and then come up with a short list and interview, identify a finalist, and that's where we really dig into refining the scope of work, refining the process, and then ultimately that's how you get to Board Member Graybill's point about budget, final budget, and costs. But in terms of the city staff defining what the scope of work is going to be, what the timeline, what the opportunities for engagement would be, the RFP is not the appropriate way to do that. The final scope of work in the contract will be will entail all of that, all of those details.
So that will be some criteria that you're looking at then in your selection.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Sanjay?
Yes, no. So, Mr. McGuire, thank you for your question answers. And I go back to the comment that Board Member Jane or Gibson made. This seems like a very optimistic, expansive project. And we don't know what the budget is and stuff like that. Is there a prioritization of the bullets? When push comes to shove, these are the ones we must have, and these are the ones are should haves.
Yes.
And these are the ones that are absolutely must haves.
Yes. Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Excellent question. And again, really, and I'm not trying to defer the question, but that's something that we would look to consultants to say, you're crazy. You're going to pay $1 million for this scope of work. And a good consultant and a good selection process will get us to those hard, difficult conversations and get us a final scope of work in a contract that can be actionable, that a consultant can execute, that our department, our city staff can execute, and we can get to a final work product. So I hesitate to offer my priorities. I think that really needs to be more of an iterative process.
This is Stephanie Littleton.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you have more, Sanjay? No. I just really want to make a comment, Brandon. I'm really quite impressed with the draft. I'm elated to see this, to be honest. I'm very, very excited for what this could bring, what this means, ultimately, where it takes us to. And I like where I read, as you went through this, genuine and effective stakeholder engagement strategies and so on. As we know, going forward, it's going to be so critical with our boards, HRC board, the community and such. Kind of just reiterating some of the folks' comments, but stakeholders in this is just past due. So I'm very excited to see this. So thank you.
Very good, Stephanie. Any other questions or comments? Jane?
I was looking for the screen shifted and moved me and I couldn't find my unmute button. This is Jane Gibson, board member. I want to know how we can expect to get a response back on whether or not the CPRB can be included in the strategic planning process, which is just mentioned in this RFP. It's not central to the RFP, but Diane, is that something that is that a question that you can help us get answered? We need somebody to follow up and get an answer to that question.
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Board Member Gibson, I would say that the strategic plan is one of the central points in the RFP. We want to bring in the consultants to work with our leadership staff in the department, with the city management, and make sure that we have a good plan to complete that strategic plan. And I would just strongly urge you not to jump ahead to a certain way of approaching that. Let's have the consultant advise us, and through this study process, which the Community Police Review Board will be engaged in, let's identify a good roadmap forward for the strategic plan.
My understanding, Mr. McGuire, this is Jane Gibson, board member, is that the strategic plan initiative has already been initiated, is it not? Or is that something that is going to be a product of this RFP?
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. It is my understanding that there has been some work already done to develop a document, just internally.
Is there a question?
No, I just can't help wondering if there's going to be a place at the table for the CPRB and the strategic plan. And I guess we're not going to get an answer to that tonight because we need the RFP to bring in some people to advise. Am I understanding correctly, Mr. McGuire, to advise whether the strategic plan needs, representatives X, Y, and Z, or, is that what you're saying?
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Typically, how a strategic planning process would go, and I'm speaking very generally, how a strategic planning process for a department would go is that you would issue, well, if you're doing it through a consultant, you would issue an RFP specific for that scope of work for a strategic planning process. If you're doing it internally, you would come up with a sort of a project outline, a project charter, if you will, that shows the process that you will undertake to go through the strategic planning process. I have not seen that from the department, and I am not sure what the status of the department's strategic planning efforts are to date, so I am not able to give you a definitive answer, which I understand you are desiring this evening, but without that knowledge, I'm not able to give you the answer that you're looking for. What I will say, though, is that the consultant will be reviewing the status of the strategic plan and will be providing us guidance on the best path forward for completion of that strategic plan. And that very well may be, and I would be surprised if it doesn't, include involvement of the Community Police Review Board. But I get the sense that that's not satisfying your question at this point.
No, actually, that was a clearer answer. Thank you very much.
Okay. And this is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. I apologize if I wasn't speaking as clearly before. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. McGuire, very much. And we'll probably find you somewhere on to here with regard to what the status is as we continue. What's the timeline in terms of submitting? I noticed there weren't any dates in that. And maybe I missed it earlier. The timeline in terms of submitting this and then the turnaround time on those that are issuing their response to the proposal?
Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Good question. We do want to advertise this as soon as possible. So I think we've taken some good notes from the board members' comments this evening, and I would ask if there are any additional comments, if you could provide those I think probably the best way to do it would be to email Diane directly. My email address should be available on the city website if you would like to look me up also. So you can feel free to email me also. But if you could provide comments by tomorrow, that would be most helpful, because we would like to get this out on the street, as we say, and start advertising just as soon as possible. We will advertise, I'm expecting about a 30-day period, and we will do some targeted recruitment or solicitation for consultants so that they are aware that this RFP is out there being advertised. And so we will have the advertisement open for 30 days, and then we will begin our review and selection process. And ultimately, it will be, I do expect us certainly to engage the Community Police Review Board on the final scope of work before it does go to the City Commission. And then ultimately, the City Commission will approve the final contract.
Okay, very good. And another question I have on that then is, what is the collaboration between you and the Lawrence Police Department right now in terms of this effort? The acting chief and other administrative leaders in the Lawrence Police Department.
Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. The department's command staff and Interim Chief Brixius, and I believe others in the department have had eyes on the RFP and have provided comments back. And so we have incorporated some of their feedback and observations into the RFP, and they will be obviously working very closely with the project team and be a part of the project team as the consultant undertakes this study. Does that hit the target for the question?
Yes, and then my other question is, so what precipitated this? Is this something that you do every 5 years, every 10 years? Is it, what's the context for it?
Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Really the context, I think, is that we have he's not that new anymore, but relatively new at the time that the thought of the study was sort of first conceived, new city manager, Craig Owens. And whenever you get a change in leadership at that level, you have new eyes on different operations and on the local expectations. And I think that he saw that this would be a valuable undertaking, certainly with the turnover in the position of Chief of Police. That also adds to the, I think this would be a valuable study to undertake at this point and to help us in our recruitment, and then ultimately help the next Chief of Police, next permanent Chief of Police, as they come into that position, to have this study in place, or at least well underway, to be able to hit the ground running.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Stephanie?
Yep, this is Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair. Brandon, did I hear you right? If we have some recommendations to make, do we email those to you by tomorrow? Was that?
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. I'll give you a firm, you need a firm timeline. So we will hold off publishing the RFP until Monday. And so if you could get me comments by Monday, by first thing Monday morning, then we can make sure that those are incorporated appropriately into the RFP.
I'm fine, Brandon, for tomorrow. I just want to make sure I did hear you right. And if I send that to, I don't know if I have your email, but obviously I can send it to Diane.
Exactly.
I have you, but yeah, I just want to clarify. Thanks, Brandon.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Brandon, thank you so much for providing that overview and walkthrough with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, so we're getting ready to wrap up. I'm wondering if Captain Squire would like to have any words with us or have any comments during the meeting.
no comments. I think Brandon spoke very well for the police department.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you again for being here. Okay, is there any other discussion? You've had a chance to look at our agenda for our next meeting. Does that meet with your approval? Yes, Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. Does that mean that nothing else could be added before that meeting to this agenda?
I don't think so. No? Diane?
Diane Stoddard,
Take agenda. Sorry.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. Were just the items that you had outlined at your last meeting that you wanted to appear on certain agendas, and so this is just kind of a planning tool for you to see those upcoming agenda items. It doesn't mean that there can't be additional things added.
Thank you. Then I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind. I don't understand the difference, I guess, between the first and second agenda items that are on there. What is the second one distinctive in a way that I'm not perceiving?
You mean number 1 and number 2?
Under number 2, for the July 27th meeting, it says receive update from the working group, and then it says discuss working group on the topic of police and community relations. I guess I don't know what the difference is there, or what they aim for.
Right.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager, I might be able to shed some light on that. So in reviewing your last meeting, there was some discussion about the update from the working group that has been created and has been meeting. There was also some discussion amongst the board about creating an additional working group on the topic of police and community relations. So I believe that was the purpose. But again, it was a discussion of the board, so I did want to make sure that I captured those agenda items correctly. If I didn't, I want to make sure that we get that added so that we can get it correct for your July 27th meeting.
Thank you, Diane.
Okay. But we can, I guess, just to make sure, we can add agenda items prior to our next meeting, which is July 27th, correct? Okay. Thank you, Diane. Are there any other items that need to be discussed?
Sorry, go ahead, Sanjay.
I was going to ask a quick question. So now that we are down to 5 and we're contemplating going to 9, how do we get to 7? When do we get to at least 7?
Sure.
Who will help us?
That's a good point, Sanjay. Diane, what's the protocol that the City Commission goes through? I know with one of the resignation letters, there was a recommendation for a board member, but what will be the protocol and timeline on that?
Yes, thank you. Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I'd be happy to answer that. So we do have a place on the website where we seek input and application from potential board members, and we would ask that anyone who has an interest to that you all may either get an inquiry of or would like to refer and would think that there would be a good board member for the board, to suggest that they complete a board interest form so that we know that they're interested in the board. As you know, from being appointed to this board does have certain requirements that are different than other boards of the city. The process then is for the mayor to recommend to the city commission appointments to this board, which then have to be approved by the commission as a whole, and that's how you get those board members added. So I believe that there are people who have expressed interest in this board. I don't know this evening how many those are that we've received, but that is something that, that the mayor regularly reviews and regularly is making appointments at city commission meetings to fill those empty positions. As to your recommendation for the additional members, then that would need to be action that the city commission would take and approve an ordinance and changing your bylaws as well. And then that would make those new positions maybe trailing a little bit in getting you back up to the full 7 that you have in the board now.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Let's go, Stephanie. I think you had something, then Bill.
Yeah, this is Stephanie Littleton, Vice Chair. Is Sergeant Ernst still present?
He is.
Okay, I just had a quick question for you, not to bug him on this, but ask if, where we stand on the Citizens Review Board, not Citizens Review Board, but Citizens Academy. If I know you're doing couple trainings a year with the PD, but just wondered where that stood.
Yeah, currently, and I'd have to check back with the command staff and ultimately Interim Chief Brixius, but I don't believe there's any immediate plans for that. We are currently, as I've mentioned before, running back-to-back academies, which are extremely labor-intensive in getting those up and running. And so the short answer is I don't think anytime soon, but ultimately I'd have to interact with Interim Chief Brixius on that.
Is there another question to that, Sergeant Ernst? Is there any possibility, as we consider the training for this board, be it the bias-based or something obviously reasonable, that we could do some training in conjunction with a PD training going on, academy?
I can ask about that, and we can see what training you're wanting to receive and whether it be alongside the recruit academy or an in-service. But yeah, I can definitely inquire about that.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I was just going to follow up. Is there a particular desire for certain type of training?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Might be helpful.
Well, I was certainly thinking of the bias-based training, and I think 2 of those 4 hours you mentioned, Sergeant Ernst, if I had read it right from last year's report, were in-house training.
Sure.
Yeah, and then 2 hours of the distance learning. And I'm certainly open to the rest of the board here if you have some thoughts so he can kind of take this back. But I hadn't really given a whole lot of other thought. You know, we've obviously had the use of force training and such. But
so, on that, through attrition, we were down to 1 bias-based policing instructor. That group has then been, I don't want to say not revamped, that's the incorrect word, but replenished. And so that might be maybe a more viable option. I don't know whether, because I know we get into the open meeting stuff where it's done at a meeting or if just small groups and we have our internal instructors that present the information to you folks that's presented to our officers or our employees.
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go Bill, then Sanjay. Bill?
This is Bill Grable, member. This is directed to Diane. And I want to revisit the comments I made when I was talking about my reservations about expanding the board. Is there any possibility we could get more than what you just described as far as publicizing these 4 vacancies so that we might have a little more diversity on this board?
Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. I will say that I know the commission has a desire to have great diversity on boards, and in fact, that is a general policy of the city. We can certainly put out a greater word about the vacancies on this particular board and others, and I think that's a point well taken about getting that word out in a better way.
As a follow-up, would it be possible maybe to see if any of the media had an interest in doing a story on
it? Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. That could be a possibility, and sometimes the media is willing to do that. Usually our best course is to put it out through our publicity channels, and then sometimes a media outlet will choose to pick it up and run a more extensive story on it. I would say that if your recommendation for the increase in the number of board members occurs, as you have recommended it, that will also be a city commission item that sometimes is the subject of a news story as well.
Thank you, Diane.
Sanjay?
So I didn't expect Stephanie, this is Sanjay Mishra, board member. I didn't expect Stephanie to ask the question about what kind of training we need. And we should have done our homework, because in the minutes, in the past we have asked, we want this training, and there's some trainings which is outstanding. So if we go back 2 or 3 minutes, you'll find. So Officer Ernst, you'll find what kind of training we've been asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, if not, is there a motion?
You in the motion to adjourn? Is that what the motion is?
I think so. I think we've taken care of all of our business.
I move. Motion to adjourn. Sanjay Mishra, board member.
It's been moved by Sanjay to adjourn. Second?
I'll second, Jane Gibson, board member.
Okay, all those in favor with an aye?
Aye.
We'll go with Sanjay, Bill.
Sanjay.
Aye.
Jane Gibson, aye.
Jane? Stephanie?
Yeah.
Okay, and I. All right, thank you all so much. We'll meet again in the end of July.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, everyone.
Y'all have a good evening.
You too, Bill.
Thank you all so much, and thank